My name is Roberta Mills, and at 62 I finally retired after teaching elementary school for 35 years to live my dream, a peaceful cottage in the Vermont woods. After my husband David passed, this sanctuary became my everything. Then came that phone call from my son-in-law Marcus. Without even asking, he announced, "My parents are moving in with you. If you don't like it, move back to the city." The entitlement in his voice left me speechless. But instead of arguing, I decided to prepare something special for their arrival. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever had to deal with entitled family members, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss what happened when these city folks experienced my woodland hospitality. Teaching was never just a job for me, it was a calling. For 35 years, I poured my heart and soul into my second-grade classroom at Oak Ridge Elementary. I still remember the smell of crayons and glue, the colorful bulletin boards I'd spend weekends creating, and most of all, the bright faces of children discovering the joy of reading for the first time. Those moments made the modest salary and long hours worthwhile. My husband David and I lived simply in a small suburban home about 30 minutes from Chicago. He worked as an accountant for a mid-sized manufacturing company, nothing glamorous but stable. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we managed our money carefully with one shared dream in mind. Someday we would retire to a small cottage in the woods where we could watch birds grow our own vegetables and fall asleep to the sound of crickets instead of traffic. We put away a little from each paycheck, brown-bagged our lunches, and took camping vacations instead of resort getaways. Our colleagues upgraded to luxury cars and bigger homes, but we kept our modest lifestyle eyes fixed on our future dream. Our daughter Lily was the light of our lives. From an early age, she shared our love of nature. I remember her tiny hands reaching for caterpillars. Her delight at spotting deer in forest preserves her collection of interesting rocks and feathers that covered every surface of her bedroom. David and I took her camping in state parks during summer breaks, teaching her about constellations, wildflowers, and the quiet wisdom of trees. When Lily was accepted to Northwestern University to study environmental science, David took a second job on weekends doing tax preparation, and I tutored after school hours to help cover her tuition. We wanted her to graduate without the burden of student loans. Those years were exhausting, but seeing her thrive made every extra hour worthwhile. It was during her junior year that she met Marcus Reynolds. He was studying business with a focus on commercial real estate development, and they met at a campus sustainability event where he was representing his fraternity. According to Lily, Marcus was charming, ambitious, and confident about his future. When she first brought him home for dinner, David and I tried to be warm and welcoming, despite our reservations. Marcus was polished and well-spoken, but there was something calculating in the way he assessed our modest home, something dismissive in his questions about our careers. When Lily mentioned our dream of a forest cottage, he smiled indulgently, as if we were describing a childish fantasy. "Wouldn't you rather travel the world and stay in 5-star resorts?" he asked. The concept of choosing simplicity seemed foreign to him. Still, Lily loved him, and we respected her judgment. When they announced their engagement after graduation, we contributed as generously as we could to their wedding, despite Marcus's parents' obvious disappointment that we couldn't match their lavish offerings. The wedding was at an exclusive country club with champagne fountains and ice sculptures, a far cry from the intimate garden ceremony we had imagined for Lily. Life continued with its steady rhythms after they married. Lily and Marcus settled in Chicago, where he joined a prestigious commercial real estate firm. Their lifestyle quickly became what David and I had intentionally avoided: a showcase home in an expensive neighborhood, luxury vehicles memberships, to exclusive clubs. During our occasional visits, I noticed Lily seemed less spontaneous, more concerned with appearances. Her collection of nature books was replaced by design magazines, her hiking boots exchanged for designer heels. Then 3 years ago, our lives changed forever when David was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The disease moved swiftly, and within 6 months, my beloved partner of 38 years was gone. Lily was supportive during those difficult months, visiting often and helping with hospital arrangements. Marcus came less frequently, always checking his watch, always on his phone, with important clients. After David's funeral, I found myself alone in our suburban home, surrounded by memories and an unexpected decision. David's life insurance policy, while not substantial, combined with our savings, would be enough to finally purchase our dream cottage. I could almost hear his voice urging me forward. "Don't wait, Robbie. Life is too short." At 61, I retired from teaching, sold our suburban home, and began searching for the perfect woodland sanctuary. After months of looking, I found it, a small 2-bedroom cottage beside a bubbling stream in rural Vermont. Built in the 1930s, it had been well maintained but not modernized, which kept the price within my budget. The property included 5 acres of woods with mature maple trees, wild blueberry bushes, and a clearing perfect for the vegetable garden I had always wanted. I spent the first few months making the cottage truly mine. I painted the kitchen a warm yellow, installed bookshelves in every room, and set up bird feeders outside each window. I learned to operate the wood stove, figured out the quirks of the well pump system, and embraced the composting toilet that previous owners had installed as an eco-friendly alternative to traditional plumbing. The internet connection was spotty at best, and cell service required walking to a specific spot by the creek, but these limitations felt like features rather than problems. I was deliberately stepping away from the constant connectivity that dominated modern life. My days fell into a natural rhythm dictated by sunlight rather than clocks. I woke with the birds, spent mornings tending my expanding garden, afternoons reading or working on small home improvement projects, and evenings watching spectacular sunsets from my porch. The nearest town was 7 miles away, close enough for weekly shopping trips, but far enough to ensure peaceful solitude. Lily visited every few months, always driving up alone. She'd arrive looking tense and leave appearing more relaxed, as if the forest worked magic on her city-tightened nerves. She never brought Marcus, always citing his busy schedule, and I never pressed the issue. During these visits, I noticed she would take deep breaths of the pine-scented air, kick off her expensive shoes, to walk barefoot in the grass, and sit for hours by the stream. Glimpses of the nature-loving girl I had raised. During one visit, about 6 months after I had settled in, she mentioned some changes in Marcus's parents' situation. "They've had some investment issues," she said vaguely. "Nothing serious, just adjustments." I offered sympathy, but didn't pry. Walter and Vivian Reynolds had never shown much interest in getting to know me, always making me feel like the unsophisticated schoolteacher who wasn't quite good enough for their social circle. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to those cryptic comments. I should have noticed the worry lines around Lily's eyes, the way she changed subjects whenever Marcus called to check on her. But I was absorbed in my new life, in the healing that comes from following a long-deferred dream. The storm clouds were gathering. But in my peaceful clearing in the woods, I didn't see them coming. The first time I met Walter and Vivian Reynolds was at Lily and Marcus's engagement dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago. They arrived 15 minutes late, making a dramatic entrance that turned heads throughout the dining room. Walter, tall and imposing in an expensive suit, immediately took charge of ordering wine without consulting anyone's preferences. Vivian, perfectly coiffed and dripping with jewelry, air-kissed Lily before giving me a cool assessment. "So you're the teacher," she said, making the profession sound like an exotic curiosity. How quaint. I always tell Marcus that educators are so underappreciated. The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. Throughout the dinner, they dominated conversation with stories about their recent trip to Monaco, their country club's exclusive membership policy, and Walter's latest business acquisition. When David mentioned our cottage dream, Walter laughed. "Why would anyone choose to live in the middle of nowhere when civilization offers so much?" he asked, gesturing around the restaurant. "No decent restaurants, no cultural events, no important connections to be made. Seems like a waste of one's golden years." That set the tone for our relationship over the years that followed. At Lily and Marcus's wedding, they seated us at a table far from the bridal party with distant cousins, while they held court at the main table. During holiday gatherings at their son's home, they would engage in conversations about investments and property values that deliberately excluded us. Vivian once examined the handmade scarf I had given Lily for Christmas and remarked, "It's nice that you make things. Not everyone can afford quality gifts." Their dismissive attitude hurt, but David and I chose not to engage. "They're different people with different values," David would say. "Lily knows who we are and what we stand for." We maintained cordial relations for our daughter's sake, sending appropriate birthday and Christmas gifts, making polite conversation at unavoidable gatherings. After David's death, they sent an elaborate flower arrangement to the funeral, but left immediately after the service, citing a charity gala they couldn't miss. Vivian hugged me stiffly and said, "If you need financial advice now that you're alone, Walter knows excellent advisors for people of modest means." I hadn't seen them since moving to Vermont. According to Lily, they found my decision to exile myself to the wilderness baffling and slightly embarrassing. "Mom's gone native." I once overheard Marcus telling someone on the phone, presumably discussing my lifestyle change. That spring morning when Marcus called was unusually beautiful. I had been up since dawn planting the tomato seedlings I had started indoors during late winter. The sun filtered through the trees. Birds were singing their morning symphonies, and I felt deeply connected to the land around me. Then my cell phone rang. Unusual as most people knew to call my landline, given the spotty cell service. Seeing Marcus's name on the screen surprised me. In the nearly 2 years since I'd moved, he had never called directly. Our communication was always through Lily. "Hello, Marcus," I answered, trying to keep the surprise from my voice. "Roberta," he began without preamble. "We need to discuss something important. My parents are having some financial difficulties. They've had to sell their house." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied genuinely. Despite our differences, I wouldn't wish financial hardship on anyone. "Yes, well, these things happen," he continued briskly. "The point is, they need a place to stay for a while. They're moving in with you." Not, "Could they possibly stay with you?" or "Would you consider helping us out?" but a flat declaration. I was momentarily speechless. "Marcus, that's not really feasible." I finally managed. "My cottage is very small, just 2 bedrooms, and my lifestyle here is quite different from what your parents are accustomed to." "It's not like you're using that second bedroom," he countered. "And they don't have other options right now. Our house is undergoing major renovations, so we can't take them in." This struck me as odd. Marcus and Lily owned a 5-bedroom house in one of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods. Renovations seemed a convenient excuse. "Have you discussed this with Lily?" I asked. "Of course," he replied quickly. "She agrees this is the best solution. It's just temporary, a few months until they get back on their feet." Something in his tone didn't ring true. "I'd like to talk to Lily about this." "She's in meetings all day," he said dismissively. "Look, this is happening. They'll be arriving in 2 weeks. If you don't like it, you can always move back to the city. Family helps family, right?" Before I could formulate a response, he continued, "I've got another call. We'll be in touch with details." And just like that, he was gone. I stood in my garden phone in hand dirt under my fingernails, utterly stunned by what had just transpired. In less than 5 minutes, my peaceful retirement had been completely upended. Marcus had just informed me, not asked, not requested, but informed me, that my home was being commandeered for his parents. My first instinct was to call Lily, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times throughout the day, with the same result. That evening, I received a text from her. "Sorry, crazy day. Call you tomorrow." When we finally connected the next day, Lily sounded exhausted and apologetic. "I'm so sorry about how Marcus handled this, Mom. He shouldn't have just sprung it on you that way." "What's really going on, Lily?" I asked. "Why can't Walter and Vivian stay with you? Your house has plenty of room." There was a long pause. "It's complicated," she finally said. "Walter made some bad investments. They've lost almost everything and had to sell their house. Marcus feels it would be uncomfortable to have them living with us. It would affect his professional image if word got out that his parents are having financial problems. So instead they should live with the mother-in-law they've barely acknowledged for years." I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "I know it's not ideal," Lily admitted, "but Marcus thinks a few months in the country would be good for them. Help them reassess their priorities." "Lily, your in-laws have never approved of my lifestyle. They've made it clear they consider me beneath them socially. Now they're supposed to live in my small cottage with 1 bathroom and a composting toilet." "They don't have many options right now," she said quietly. "Please, Mum, I'm caught in the middle here." That phrase, "caught in the middle," told me everything I needed to know. Marcus had made this decision unilaterally, and Lily, always eager to keep peace, had acquiesced. "I need to think about this," I told her. "This isn't just about providing a room. My home is my sanctuary. Having 2 people who have always looked down on me suddenly living here would change everything." After hanging up, I grabbed my walking stick and headed into the woods. The familiar trail helped clear my head as I processed what was happening. Part of me wanted to call Marcus back and firmly refuse. Another part worried about damaging my relationship with Lily. And a small petty part imagined Walter and Vivian's horror at having to use a composting toilet. That evening, I video called my closest friend Eleanor, who had retired to Arizona after 30 years of teaching alongside me. "They're doing what?" she exclaimed when I explained the situation. "Rob, you can't let this happen. Those people have treated you like dirt for years, and now they expect to invade your personal space. Absolutely not." "I'm worried about my relationship with Lily," I admitted. "She's clearly under pressure from Marcus." "Then call Marcus's bluff," Eleanor suggested. "Tell him his parents are welcome to visit for a weekend to see if the arrangement would work for everyone. 1 weekend of your rustic lifestyle will send them running back to civilization." The idea planted a seed in my mind. Not exactly what Eleanor had suggested, but something with potential. The next day, I drove into town and scheduled an appointment with a local lawyer just to understand my rights in this situation. The consultation confirmed what I already knew. I had no obligation to house anyone in my home, regardless of family connection. "You own your property outright," the lawyer explained. "No one can force you to take in boarder's family or otherwise." Armed with this knowledge, I spent the next few days considering my options. Direct confrontation would likely estrange Lily further. Grudging acceptance would make me miserable and potentially resentful. But perhaps there was a third approach, one that might actually prove educational for everyone involved. That night, unable to sleep, I sat at my kitchen table making a comprehensive list of my daily cottage realities. Wood stove requires physical labor to maintain heat. Water conservation, essential with well system. Composting toilet needs. Regular maintenance, limited internet and cell service. Mile-long walk to mailbox. Weekly town trips for supplies. Early rising with the sun. Constant outdoor maintenance. Wildlife encounters including the family of raccoons that regularly visited my porch. As I reviewed the list, a plan began to form. I wouldn't change my lifestyle to accommodate Walter and Vivian's urban expectations. Instead, I would fully embrace it. I wouldn't make things intentionally difficult, but I wouldn't go out of my way to modernize or ease their transition either. This would be an authentic experience of the lifestyle they had so often dismissed as quaint and primitive. If they wanted to live in my cottage, they would live as I did, simply sustainably and in harmony with nature's rhythms. No special accommodations, no concessions to their preferences for luxury or convenience. Just authentic cottage living, complete with all its challenges and rewards. The more I thought about it, the more right this approach felt. It wasn't about revenge or teaching them a lesson. It was about honesty, about showing them exactly what they were demanding to be part of. If they couldn't handle it, the decision to leave would be theirs, not mine. With new determination, I began preparing for their arrival. Not by making my cottage more hospitable, but by ensuring it remained authentically mine. With 2 weeks to prepare for my unwanted guests, I set to work not on making my cottage more comfortable for city dwellers, but on highlighting its rustic authenticity. My first task was a complete inventory of what Walter and Vivian would likely consider deficiencies in my living situation. My cottage had been built in the 1930s as a hunting cabin before being gradually expanded by various owners. Its charm lay in its character, not its conveniences. The main living space was open and bright, with large windows overlooking the woods. The kitchen was functional but basic. A propane stove, a modest refrigerator, open shelving, instead of cabinets and no dishwasher. The living area featured comfortable but well-worn furniture, arranged around the wood stove that served as the primary heat source. The single bathroom contained a clawfoot tub with a handheld shower attachment, a sink with occasionally temperamental plumbing, and the composting toilet that had initially taken even me some time to get used to. My bedroom was small and simple, with a handmade quilt on the bed and bookshelves lining one wall. The second bedroom, soon to be Walter and Vivian's, was even smaller, with just enough space for a full-sized bed, a small dresser, and a reading chair by the window. Internet came through a satellite connection that worked when weather permitted and often required repositioning the dish after heavy winds. Cell service was limited to one specific spot near the creek where I had placed a small bench for phone calls. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and the mailbox was at the end of my long driveway where it met the main road. Rather than upgrading any of these systems, I decided to document them thoroughly. I spent an afternoon creating a detailed cottage manual with precise instructions for everything from starting the wood stove to maintaining the composting toilet. I included notes about water conservation, important with a well system power usage. The electrical system couldn't handle multiple appliances running simultaneously, and wildlife awareness, including which local berries were poisonous, and how to recognize bear signs on the trails. Instead of stocking up on convenience foods, I thought they might prefer. I filled my pantry with my usual staples: dried beans, rice flour for bread making, home-canned vegetables from last year's garden. The freezer contained venison, gifted by my neighbor Tom, who hunted responsibly on his property. I considered the guest room carefully. The comfortable mattress that had served occasional visitors was still in good condition, but I decided to replace it with a firm futon that required proper folding each morning, another small lesson in daily maintenance. I removed the small television I kept there for visitors and installed more bookshelves filled with field guides to local plants and wildlife journals about sustainable living and practical manuals on everything from foraging to basic plumbing repair. In the bathroom, I replaced the conventional toilet paper with the recycled brand I preferred. Set out the homemade soaps I crafted from local ingredients and added a prominent sign about water conservation above the tub. The guidelines were specific 4-minute showers, an inch of water for baths, and the reminder that the hot water tank held enough for 2 short showers before needing recovery time. Outside, I planned projects that would need attention. During their stay, the vegetable garden would need spring planting, the compost pile required, turning, and the trails through my woods needed clearing after winter. The rain barrel system I used for garden irrigation could use an upgrade. A perfect project to involve Walter, who had always prided himself on his handyman skills, despite likely having hired professionals for any actual work on his luxurious home. I made no special grocery purchases for their arrival. My usual shopping trip to town yielded fresh vegetables, locally produced cheese and eggs, whole grain bread from the small bakery, and bulk items from the food co-op, where I volunteered one Saturday a month. My diet was simple, healthy, and largely plant-based, with occasional fish or local meat. While in town, I stopped by the local internet provider's office to inquire about upgrade options, knowing full well what the answer would be. "Sorry, Ms. Mills," the technician explained. "Your location is too remote for our high-speed services. The satellite connection is really your only option out there." Perfect, I thought, thanking him for confirming what I already knew. This would be just one more authentic aspect of cottage life for Walter and Vivian to experience. I also reached out to several neighbours, explaining that my in-laws would be visiting to experience country living. Tom, a retired park ranger with a magnificent beard and colourful opinions about government surveillance, immediately offered to bring over some of his homemade moonshine to welcome them. Sarah, an artist who lived in a yurt with her 5 rescue dogs, suggested a community potluck to introduce them around. Both ideas would provide excellent cultural experiences for my urban guests. As the arrival date approached, Marcus called twice more with additional requests and assumptions. "My father will need a dedicated space for his morning exercise routine," he informed me, "and Mother takes a hot bath every evening for her arthritis. Oh, and they'll need recommendations for quality restaurants in the area." I responded with deliberate vagueness. "I'm sure we'll work everything out when they arrive." I said, not mentioning that my hot water tank couldn't accommodate daily baths, or that the nearest quality restaurant was 40 minutes away and closed on weekdays. The day before their scheduled arrival, Lily called. "How are you feeling about tomorrow, Mum?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "I'm ready," I assured her, which was absolutely true, though perhaps not in the way she imagined. "I've prepared the guest room and made space for them." "Thanks for doing this," she said. "I know it's not ideal for anyone. Marcus says they'll adjust their expectations." I doubted Walter and Vivian Reynolds had adjusted their expectations about anything in their entire lives, but I kept that thought to myself. "It will certainly be an experience for all of us," I replied. That night, I sat on my porch, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, a glass of elderberry wine in hand. A family of deer grazed at the edge of my clearing, unafraid of human presence. Barred owls called to each other from the tall pines. The peace of this place, the connection to natural rhythms, had healed something in me after David's death. I hoped that connection might still be possible, even with the disruption that was coming. I also acknowledged the small, satisfying flutter of anticipation in my stomach. Walter and Vivian had spent years looking down on my chosen profession, my modest lifestyle, and my values. Now they would experience firsthand what that lifestyle actually entailed. Not as a punishment, but as an education. As darkness fell completely, I made one final preparation. I removed the battery-operated clock from the guest bedroom wall. In my cottage, we rose with the sun and rested with the darkness. Time was marked by natural rhythms, not electronic beeping. It would be the first of many adjustments my guests would face. I woke as I always did, with the first light of dawn streaming through my bedroom window. By 5:30 a.m., I was dressed in my gardening clothes, well-worn jeans, a faded flannel shirt, and mud-caked boots. I made a pot of strong coffee and carried it to the porch, where I watched the morning mist rise from the creek while planning my day. Walter and Vivian were scheduled to arrive around noon. I had deliberately chosen not to alter my routine for their arrival, so by mid-morning I was deep in garden work, digging new beds for the summer squash, my hands caked with rich dark soil. Just before 11, I heard the sound of a vehicle struggling up my unpaved driveway. Rising from my work, I shaded my eyes against the spring sunshine to see a sleek black SUV navigating the ruts and puddles left by recent rain. The vehicle looked comically out of place in my rustic setting, like a penguin in a prairie. I didn't hurry to wash up or change clothes. Instead, I continued working until the SUV came to a stop in the small clearing I used as a parking area. The driver's door opened, and Marcus emerged, looking distinctly uncomfortable in designer loafers that immediately sank into the soft ground. He glanced at the mud now covering his expensive shoes with poorly concealed dismay. "Roberta," he called, forcing a smile. "We're a bit early. The GPS actually found this place." I nodded, setting down my garden trowel and walking over without rushing. "Welcome to Woodland Cottage," I said simply. The passenger doors opened to reveal Walter and Vivian, both looking as if they'd arrived on an alien planet. Walter, once imposing in his tailored suits, seemed diminished somehow in casual clothes that still managed to look uncomfortably formal for the setting. Vivian had apparently tried to dress for country life in white pants and a silk blouse, with jewelry still glittering at her neck and wrists. Both wore expressions of barely concealed shock as they surveyed their new surroundings. "This is certainly remote." Vivian managed her gaze fixing on my dirt-covered hands and work clothes. "It's peaceful," I replied with a genuine smile. "You catch the morning just right. The trilliums are blooming along the creek path." Walter cleared his throat. "Marcus mentioned you've prepared a room for us." "Of course, let me show you around." I made no move to help with their luggage, which Marcus was struggling to extract from the SUV, multiple large suitcases for what had been described as a temporary stay. I led them along the flagstone path to the cottage, noting how Vivian tiptoed carefully to avoid muddying her white canvas shoes. At the door, I casually mentioned, "You might want to leave your shoes on the porch. It helps keep the floors clean." The main room of the cottage was bright with late-morning sunlight, the wood stove in the corner radiating gentle heat. Books filled every available shelf space, plants thrived on windowsills, and handmade quilts added color to the simple furniture. "This is the main living area," I explained unnecessarily. "Kitchen's through there. I make bread on Wednesdays and Saturdays, but there's some left from the weekend in the bread box." Walter and Vivian exchanged glances, but said nothing. "The bathroom is down that short hall." I continued leading them through the cottage. "It's the only one, so we'll need to coordinate morning routines. I'm usually up at dawn and done by 6. I opened the bathroom door to reveal the clawfoot tub simple sink and the composting toilet that immediately drew Walter's concerned attention. "Where's the actual bathroom?" he asked. "This is it," I replied cheerfully. "The composting toilet is actually quite efficient once you get used to it. There are detailed instructions in the cottage manual. Basically, you use it like a regular toilet, but add a scoop of this cedar mulch after each use." I indicated the small wooden bucket beside the toilet. Vivian's face had gone pale. "There's no regular toilet. This is regular for me," I explained. "It's environmentally friendly and perfectly sanitary when maintained correctly. The manual has all the details about weekly maintenance." Before she could respond, I continued the tour, showing them to the small bedroom that would be theirs. Marcus followed with the first of many suitcases, his forehead beading with sweat from the exertion. "This will be your room," I said, opening the door to reveal the simple space with the futon dresser and bookshelves. The futon is more comfortable if you fold it properly each morning. There are extra blankets in the trunk if you get cold at night. The wood stove heats the main areas well, but the bedrooms can be cooler. Wood stove. Walter repeated, his voice rising slightly. Is that the only heat source? Yes, it's quite efficient, I assured him. You'll want to bring in wood from the pile each evening, so it's ready for morning. I usually bank the fire before bed, and then rebuild it first thing. Marcus had been silent during most of the tour, but now he spoke up. Mom mentioned you have internet. His tone suggested this was the one modern convenience he was counting on for his parents. Satellite connection, I confirmed. It works most days, weather permitting. There's a specific spot down by the creek for cell reception if you need to make calls. I've placed a bench there for comfort. Vivian looked increasingly distressed. But how do you... what about... She gestured vaguely, seemingly unable to articulate the many comforts she was already missing. The cottage manual explains everything, I said, retrieving a thick binder from the kitchen counter. I've documented all the systems and routines that make living here comfortable and sustainable. There's a section on wildlife encounters that you'll want to review before walking the trails. Walter took the binder with the expression of someone being handed a manual for disarming explosives. Wildlife encounters. Nothing to worry about if you're prepared, I assured him. The black bears generally keep their distance if you make noise while walking. The manual explains which berry bushes attract them, so you'll want to avoid picking there. Marcus glanced at his watch. I should get going if I want to beat traffic back to the city, he said, his eagerness to escape palpable. Of course, I nodded. I'm sure your parents will want to get settled. Walter looked at his son with barely concealed panic. You're leaving already. We haven't even discussed the arrangements. Everything's arranged, Dad, Marcus said quickly. Roberta has kindly offered her home, and you've got my number if you need anything. He was already backing toward the door. I'll check in by phone tomorrow. And just like that, after helping bring in the remaining luggage, Marcus was gone, the sound of his SUV fading as he retreated down the driveway, leaving his parents standing awkwardly in my living room. I was about to make lunch, I said into the silence. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread. You're welcome to join me or rest from your journey. Perhaps we should unpack first, Vivian suggested, clinging to familiar activities in this unfamiliar environment. Of course. Take your time. I returned to the kitchen, giving them space to process their new reality. Through the open window, I could hear their urgent whispers from the bedroom. This is impossible, Walter. Did you see that toilet? Keep your voice down, it's temporary. Once the market recovers, there isn't even a proper shower. And where's the television? How are we supposed to get news? I smiled to myself as I stirred the vegetable soup, simmering on my propane stove. The education had begun. When they emerged 30 minutes later, both looked slightly shell-shocked. Walter immediately attempted to establish some control over the situation. Roberta, we appreciate your hospitality, but there are a few things we'll need to discuss regarding arrangements. Vivian requires a proper bath each evening for her arthritis, and I have business calls that require reliable internet. I nodded sympathetically. The hot water tank holds enough for one bath every other day if no one else uses hot water that day. As for internet, it's most reliable in clear weather from about 10 to 2. I plan my online activities accordingly. That's not going to work, Walter stated flatly. I'll need to arrange for proper internet installation. You're welcome to inquire, I replied, knowing what the answer would be. I checked again last week, and they confirmed this area is too remote for broadband. The satellite is literally the only option. Walter's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more as I served the simple lunch of homemade vegetable soup and fresh bread. Vivian picked at her food, taking tiny bites, as if afraid the rustic cuisine might somehow contaminate her. This is interesting, she offered politely. Do you eat vegetarian all the time? Not strictly, I explained. I have venison in the freezer from my neighbor's hunt last fall. I try to eat locally and seasonally as much as possible. Walter made an attempt at normal conversation. So do you go into town often for entertainment or dining? I go once a week for supplies, I explained. There's a small movie theatre that shows independent films on weekends, and a decent cafe that serves lunch. The library has an active book club that meets monthly. That's all. Vivian looked genuinely confused, as if I'd described life on a distant planet. Nature provides most of my entertainment, I said simply. There's a family of otters in the creek that's better than any television show, and the bird watching is exceptional this time of year. After lunch, I suggested they might want to rest, knowing the culture shock was probably exhausting. I have some garden work to finish, I explained. Dinner is at 6, early since I usually rise with the sun and retire not long after dark. Feel free to explore, but please review the trail markers section in the manual first. The white blazes mark safe paths. Red ones indicate steep terrain, and yellow means possible wildlife activity areas. I returned to my gardening, leaving them to adjust. Through the open windows, I heard Vivian's increasingly distressed attempts to get cell service inside the cottage, followed by Walter's frustrated efforts to connect to the satellite internet, which was indeed having one of its weather-related off days. Around 4 o'clock, I spotted Walter cautiously making his way down the path toward the creek, phone in hand, clearly seeking the promised cell reception spot. He was still wearing his city loafers now, thoroughly muddied, and had added a light jacket against the afternoon breeze. I watched as he found the bench and immediately began making calls, his voice carrying across the quiet landscape as he tried to maintain his business persona while surrounded by nature's indifference to human concerns. Meanwhile, Vivian had ventured onto the porch with a fashion magazine she'd brought from the city. She jumped visibly when a blue jay landed on the railing beside her, dropping the magazine and retreating inside. Through the window, I saw her meticulously wiping down surfaces in the kitchen with antibacterial wipes she'd apparently packed for this wilderness adventure. By dinner time, Walter had returned from his creekside office, looking rumpled and defeated. "The reception is spotty at best," he reported, with barely contained frustration. 3 calls dropped mid-conversation. "I can't conduct business this way." "The weather affects it," I acknowledged. "Clear days are better. You learn to work with nature's rhythms here, rather than fighting them." Dinner was simple. A salad from my early garden greens, roasted root vegetables, and the promised venison steaks, which seemed to slightly mollify Walter. As we ate, I casually mentioned the next day's schedule. "I usually start my day with bird watching at dawn, around 5:30 this time of year. You're welcome to join me. Then breakfast followed by morning chores. Tomorrow's wood chopping day. The pile needs restocking." Walter nearly choked on his water. "Wood chopping." "For the stove," I explained. "It's good exercise. Then I thought we could walk the property line so you can get oriented. The afternoon is usually my quiet time for reading or crafts. Evenings I often sit on the porch and listen to the owls." Vivian looked genuinely distressed. "Is there do you ever watch television?" "Go shopping, dine out," I supplied helpfully. "Occasionally when I go to town. But daily life here is more about connecting with natural rhythms than seeking entertainment." That night, as they retired to their room, I overheard more urgent whispers. "Call Marcus first thing tomorrow. This is not what we agreed to. The cell service barely works. And did you hear her wood chopping?" "It's one night, Vivian. We'll sort it out tomorrow." I smiled to myself as I banked the fire in the wood stove. Day 1 of authentic cottage living was complete. Tomorrow would bring new lessons in self-sufficiency and simplicity. Not as punishment, but as education. Sometimes the most valuable learning comes from direct experience rather than words. As I had promised, I rose with the dawn quietly moving through my morning routine. By 5:30, I was on the porch with my binoculars and bird guide, watching a pair of scarlet tanagers flit through the trees. The cottage remained silent behind me, Walter and Vivian apparently not early risers, despite my invitation to join the morning birdwatch. When they finally emerged around 8, both looking tired and slightly disheveled, I had already completed my morning stretches, enjoyed 2 cups of coffee, refilled all the bird feeders, and started bread dough for the day's baking. "Good morning," I greeted them cheerfully. "Coffee's on the stove. Help yourselves to eggs and oatmeal." Walter immediately reached for his phone. "I need to call Marcus. Where did you say the reception spot was again?" "Down by the creek, about 50 yards along the path," I reminded him. "The bench with the blue paint. But breakfast is ready now, and it's better warm." He hesitated, clearly torn between his urgent need to communicate with his son and the simple human desire for morning sustenance. His stomach apparently won the battle as he reluctantly set down the phone and joined us at the table. Breakfast was another opportunity for them to experience cottage reality. The eggs came from my neighbor's chickens with bright orange yolks that immediately drew Vivian's suspicious gaze. The coffee was strong and served in mismatched mugs rather than a formal coffee service. The oatmeal was plain, with homemade applesauce and maple syrup from local trees as toppings. "Is there any regular coffee?" Vivian asked hesitantly, taking a small sip and failing to hide her grimace. "This is regular for me," I explained. "Medium roast, locally grown. If you prefer something different, we can pick it up on the next town day. Saturday." Walter looked up from his plate. "Saturday, but that's 4 days away." "Yes," I nodded. "Weekly shopping trips are sufficient when you plan carefully. The cottage manual has a section on meal planning and food storage." After breakfast, Walter did indeed make his way to the creek for his call to Marcus. I busied myself with indoor chores, giving him privacy, while remaining within earshot of the inevitable conversation. His voice carried clearly through the morning air. "Marcus, this is unacceptable," he began without preamble. "The bathroom has some kind of composting contraption instead of a proper toilet. There's no reliable internet or cell service. And she expects me to chop wood." I couldn't hear Marcus's response, but Walter's side of the conversation painted a clear picture. "No, you don't understand. This isn't just rustic. It's primitive. What do you mean, adjust? Your mother would never survive here. Well, how long is a while? We can't possibly. Yes, I understand the situation, but surely there are other options." The conversation continued for some time, with Walter's tone growing increasingly frustrated. When he finally returned to the cottage, his expression was a mixture of resignation and determination. "I spoke with Marcus," he announced unnecessarily. "He suggests we give this arrangement a chance. Apparently the real estate market is quite volatile right now, and his house renovations are more extensive than anticipated." "I'm sure we can make it work," I replied mildly. "Now, about that wood chopping. Shall we get started before the day gets too warm?" What followed was Walter's first lesson in physical self-sufficiency. Dressed in his idea of casual clothes, khaki pants and a button-down shirt, he reluctantly followed me to the woodpile, where splitting logs awaited our attention. I demonstrated the proper technique, with the axe splitting a log cleanly along its grain. "Your turn," I said, offering him the tool. To his credit, Walter tried. Red-faced and sweating through his inappropriate attire, he managed to split several logs before declaring he needed a break. Vivian watched from the porch, horror evident on her face as her formerly executive husband performed manual labor. The rest of that first day established the pattern that would continue in the days ahead. Each activity, from washing dishes by hand to hanging laundry on the clothesline, presented a new challenge to their city sensibilities. The composting toilet remained a particular source of distress, with Vivian initially refusing to use it until necessity finally overcame reluctance. That evening, as promised, my neighbor Tom stopped by with his homemade moonshine to welcome the city folks. With his wild-beard flannel shirt and colorful opinions about government surveillance, he presented yet another aspect of rural life Walter and Vivian had never encountered. Their forced smiles as he expounded on his theories about tracking devices in commercial toiletries were almost worth the entire situation. "You folks are lucky to have Roberta as a host," Tom declared, raising his mason jar of clear liquid in a toast. Best neighbor in 3 counties. Helped me birth my goats triplets last spring when the vet couldn't get through. Hands went right in there and turned that 3rd kid around. Vivian nearly fainted at this vivid description, while Walter downed his moonshine in one desperate gulp, triggering a coughing fit that had Tom helpfully pounding his back with a hand the size of a dinner plate. As they retreated to their room that night, I overheard Vivian weeping softly. I can't do this, Walter. The toilet, the physical labor, the insects everywhere. It's not right. We don't have a choice right now. Walter responded, his voice hollow with defeat. Marcus was clear. Their renovations won't be done for months, and we can't afford a rental with what's left in our accounts. We just have to adapt temporarily. I felt a momentary twinge of sympathy, but reminded myself that this situation had been forced upon me without consultation or consideration. The education would continue as planned. The first week of Walter and Vivian's stay unfolded as a series of educational moments, some challenging, some amusing, and some unexpectedly revealing. By day 3, certain realities of cottage life had been firmly established. The internet situation quickly became Walter's primary frustration. His attempts to conduct business remotely were repeatedly thwarted by the spotty connection. I would find him at the creekside bench at all hours, regardless of weather, desperately trying to maintain connections with his remaining business associates. This is impossible, he declared, after a particularly frustrating morning when rain had rendered the satellite connection completely useless. How do you function without reliable communication? I plan around it, I explained. Important emails are drafted offline and sent during clear weather windows. Phone calls are scheduled for optimal reception times, and many things that seem urgent really aren't when you step back from them. He looked at me as if I was speaking a foreign language. Vivian, meanwhile, had her own challenges. Her attempt to order groceries online was met with my gentle explanation that no delivery services reached this far into the woods. Her efforts to maintain her appearance according to city standards, perfect hair, manicured nails, carefully applied makeup, gradually gave way to the practical realities of country living. My hair products are running low, she mentioned on the 4th day. I don't suppose there's a salon nearby. The general store in town carries basic supplies, I offered, and there's a woman who cuts hair in her kitchen about 20 minutes from here. She's quite good with simple styles. Vivian's expression suggested I had recommended she shave her head. Their clothing choices also underwent forced evolution. Walter's khakis and button-downs were impractical for woodpile duties and garden work. After snagging an expensive shirt on a bramble during a property walk, he reluctantly accepted the loan of some of David's old flannel shirts and jeans that I had kept. Vivian's white pants had been permanently stained on day 1, and her collection of silk blouses proved entirely unsuitable for cottage life. The physical demands of daily tasks took a toll as well. By the end of the first week, both were collapsing into bed shortly after dinner, their bodies unaccustomed to the constant activity that maintaining a rural property required. Yet I also noticed small changes. Walter's improved technique with the axe, Vivian's decreasing squeamishness about the composting toilet, both of them sleeping more soundly in the quiet darkness of the forest night. On the 5th day, the weather provided its own lesson in rural realities. A spring storm rolled in suddenly, bringing heavy rain that pounded on the metal roof and wind that howled through the surrounding trees. As evening approached, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. "What happened?" Vivian called from the bathroom, her voice high with alarm. "Power outage," I explained calmly, already moving to light the oil lamps I kept ready for such occasions. "Happens fairly regularly during storms. Could be hours or days before it's restored." "Days." Walter emerged from the bedroom, his face ghostly in the lamplight. "But what about the refrigerator, the heat?" "The wood stove doesn't need electricity," I reminded him. And I have a small generator for the refrigerator if the outage lasts more than a day. Otherwise, we'll move perishables to the cold storage cellar. I handed each of them a flashlight and began setting out additional oil lamps. The cottage took on a warm golden glow that I had always found comforting during outages. Without the hum of modern appliances, the sound of the rain became more pronounced, creating a soothing backdrop to our simplified evening. "Now what?" Vivian asked, clutching her flashlight like a lifeline. "Now we enjoy the evening," I replied, retrieving a deck of cards and a bottle of blackberry wine I had made the previous summer. No different from any other night, except more atmospheric. That evening, perhaps because the darkness created a sense of intimacy, or perhaps because the week of physical work had worn down their defenses, Walter and Vivian began to talk more openly than they had since arriving. The card game gradually gave way to conversation, lubricated by the sweet blackberry wine. "I never imagined ending up like this," Walter admitted, staring into his glass. "All those years of careful investments, building connections, climbing the ladder. Then one bad decision, one market shift, and it's all gone." "Was it just one decision?" I asked, genuinely curious about how people who had seemed so financially secure had fallen so dramatically. Walter sighed heavily. "A series of increasingly risky investments trying to recover from the first loss. The classic downward spiral. Pride wouldn't let me admit the situation until it was too late." "We kept up appearances until the very end," Vivian added, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "Still attending charity galas when we could barely pay the property taxes. Still buying designer clothes when the credit cards were maxed out. It seems so foolish now." "And Marcus wouldn't take you in." I asked the question that had been bothering me since their arrival. They exchanged glances loaded with unspoken meaning. "Marcus is very concerned with appearances," Vivian said carefully. "Having his financially ruined parents living in his guest suite wouldn't project the right image to his business associates." "Or his wife," Walter added with a touch of bitterness. "Caroline has very specific ideas about their home aesthetic. Apparently we don't fit the decor." This was the first I'd heard about Marcus's wife having opinions on the matter. I thought Lily was supportive of helping family. I pressed, confused by this new information. Another loaded glance between Walter and Vivian before Walter spoke again. "Lily was kind about the situation, but she defers to Marcus and Caroline on household decisions. It's their primary residence after all. She mainly uses their Chicago apartment when she's in town for work." This revelation sent my mind spinning. Lily and Marcus maintained separate residences. That wasn't something my daughter had ever mentioned. Before I could ask more questions, a sharp crack of thunder shook the cottage, followed by a thud on the roof. "What was that?" Vivian gasped, clutching Walter's arm. "Probably a branch," I said, rising to check the windows. "It happens during storms. We'll assess any damage in the morning." As if on cue, a slow drip of water began to fall from the ceiling, directly onto Walter and Vivian's borrowed bed, visible through their partially open bedroom door. "Oh dear," I said with genuine concern, but also a touch of educational satisfaction. "Looks like we have a leak. Let me get some buckets." The rest of the evening was spent moving furniture positioning buckets and creating a waterproof covering for their bed, using tarps I kept on hand for such emergencies. Walter, to my surprise, took on the task with unexpected competence, following my instructions without complaint. "Not my first leak," he admitted when I commented on his handiness. "Our first apartment after we married had terrible plumbing. Couldn't afford a plumber, so I learned by necessity." This glimpse into their early life before wealth had shaped them into the people I had known was unexpectedly humanizing. Perhaps there was more to Walter and Vivian than the entitled facade they had presented for so many years. The next morning revealed the full impact of the storm. A large branch had indeed fallen on the roof, creating the leak. The driveway was partially blocked by another downed tree. The power remained out with no estimate for restoration, given the remote location. After a breakfast of cold cereal and fruit, I outlined the day's priorities, clearing the driveway, patching the roof temporarily, and checking the property for other damage. To my surprise, Walter volunteered to help with the driveway clearing without being asked. "I may not be a lumberjack," he said with a self-deprecating smile, "but I can certainly drag branches." As we worked side by side in the muddy aftermath of the storm, I saw Walter in a new light. Beneath the arrogant businessman was a person with genuine capabilities, adaptability, and even flashes of humor. By midday, sweaty and dirt-covered, he had earned a new kind of respect in my eyes. Vivian, meanwhile, took it upon herself to reorganize the kitchen into a more efficient configuration for operating without electricity. Her attention to detail, once directed at maintaining appearances, proved valuable in creating systems for water conservation and food storage during the outage. That afternoon, Marcus arrived unexpectedly, his SUV navigating the partially cleared driveway with obvious difficulty. His shock at finding his father helping me patch the roof while wearing David's old clothes was almost comical. "Dad, what are you doing up there?" He called his designer sunglasses slightly askew as he craned his neck upward. Walter wiped sweat from his forehead with a bandana, another borrowed item he would never have considered wearing weeks earlier. "Fixing a leak," he replied simply. "Be down in a minute." Marcus's visit quickly revealed itself as a welfare check rather than genuine concern. He seemed disturbed by the changes already visible in his parents after just a week of cottage living. When Walter casually mentioned having learned to use the composting toilet without complaint, Marcus looked positively alarmed. "This situation clearly isn't working," he announced as we sat on the porch with lemonade I had prepared that morning. "The conditions here are primitive. I had no idea things were so basic." I raised an eyebrow. "Your parents are adapting well," I pointed out. "And I believe you told me this arrangement was necessary for several months at least." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, perhaps we need to reconsider. Maybe a small apartment in town would be more suitable." "With what money?" Walter asked bluntly. "You've made it clear you won't be providing financial assistance, and our resources are limited to what's left after paying our debts." This frank discussion of their financial situation seemed to embarrass Marcus, who quickly changed the subject. The remainder of his visit was brief and awkward. As he prepared to leave, he took me aside with obvious discomfort. "I had no idea your living situation was so rustic," he said quietly. "When you said cottage in the woods, I imagined something more like a vacation home with modern amenities." "This is my home," I replied simply. "It meets my needs perfectly." "Yes, but for my parents," he began, then stopped himself. "Well, I'll look into other options and be in touch." After Marcus departed, I expected Walter and Vivian to be eager for news of alternate arrangements. Instead, Walter returned immediately to the roof repair, and Vivian continued her kitchen reorganization project without comment. The conversation about leaving didn't materialize that evening, nor the next day, when power was finally restored. By the end of the second week, something unexpected had begun to emerge from this forced living arrangement. Walter rose early one morning to join me for bird-watching without being prompted. Vivian asked for my recipe for homemade bread and made her first tentative attempt at baking. Both had stopped checking their phones constantly, gradually adjusting to the rhythms of life dictated by sunlight and seasons rather than digital notifications. More surprisingly, they began to share stories of their early life together, before wealth had shaped their values and expectations. Tales of their first apartment, with its leaky pipes and temperamental heating. Weekends spent at free community events because they couldn't afford other entertainment. The satisfaction of saving for their first modest home. "We were actually happy then," Vivian reflected one evening as we sat on the porch, watching fireflies emerge. Happier in some ways than after Walter's business took off. Success came with so many expectations and obligations. Walter nodded in agreement. Keeping up with the right people, joining the right clubs, living in the right neighborhood. It became a treadmill we couldn't step off without losing face. "And now?" I asked. Walter gestured to the peaceful scene around us, the darkening woods, the chorus of frogs from the creek, the simplicity of our surroundings. "Now we've lost face anyway. Might as well remember what actually matters." This philosophical turn wasn't what I had expected when planning my educational surprise for these unwanted guests. I had anticipated frustration, culture shock, and eventual retreat, not genuine reflection or adaptation. As the third week of their stay began, I found myself reassessing my own expectations and assumptions. 3 weeks into Walter and Vivian's stay at my woodland cottage, the transformation in their appearance and demeanor was remarkable. Walter's formerly manicured hands now bore calluses from daily work with the axe and garden tools. His expensive haircut had grown out, giving him a more relaxed appearance that actually suited him better. He had developed a morning routine of his own. Coffee on the porch at dawn, followed by checking the perimeter of the property before starting the day's tasks. Vivian's immaculate manicure had given way to practical short nails better suited to kitchen work and crafts. She had abandoned makeup entirely except for lip balm to protect against the sun, and her designer clothes remained in suitcases while she adopted increasingly practical attire borrowed from my closet. Most surprisingly, she had taken an interest in my herb garden, spending hours learning to identify plants and their medicinal or culinary uses. Physical changes were matched by shifts in attitude. Complaints about the composting toilet had ceased entirely. The lack of reliable internet was now accepted with resigned shrugs rather than frustration. Their bodies had adapted to the physical demands of country living, with both showing improved stamina and fewer aches from daily chores. Most significantly, Walter and Vivian had begun to open up about the reality of their financial collapse in ways they clearly hadn't with their own son. One evening, over a simple dinner of garden vegetables and fresh trout, Walter had caught himself, the full story emerged. "It wasn't just bad investments," Walter admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "It was a lifestyle we couldn't actually afford, maintained for decades on increasingly precarious finances. The country club memberships, the luxury vehicles, the vacations, all funded by borrowing against assets that weren't as valuable as we pretended. We lived in fear of being exposed as frauds," Vivian added softly. "Every dinner party, every charity gala was an exercise in maintaining appearances while the foundation crumbled beneath us." "Why continue the charade?" I asked. "Surely scaling back gradually would have been better than complete collapse." Walter shook his head. "My business relied on the perception of success. The moment clients sensed financial weakness, they would have fled. And our social standing, our entire identity was built on our position in society," Vivian finished for him. "Who would we be without it? Who are you now?" I asked gently. They exchanged glances, a moment of silent communication between people who had shared a life for over 40 years. "We're still figuring that out," Walter finally replied. "But something simpler, I think. Something more authentic." This conversation revealed the human complexity behind the entitled facade they had presented for so many years. Their behavior, which I had interpreted as simple snobbery, stemmed from a deeper insecurity, fear of losing status, fear of being revealed as less successful than they appeared. Understanding this didn't excuse their past treatment of me, but it made their transformation during these weeks at the cottage more comprehensible. The following day brought another unexpected development when Lily arrived unannounced, her compact car navigating the driveway with more ease than Marcus's SUV had managed. She looked tired, but brightened at the sight of me working in the garden alongside her in-laws. "Mom," she called, climbing out of the car. I've been trying to call, but the service is so spotty up here. I embraced her warmly, noticing her surprised expression as she surveyed Walter and Vivian's changed appearance. We've been busy with spring planting, I explained. Your in-laws have become quite helpful around the property. Lily's confusion was evident as Walter proudly showed her the vegetable rows he had helped plant, and Vivian offered to make tea from herbs freshly picked from the garden. This was clearly not the scene she had expected to find. Marcus said things weren't working out, she said quietly, when we had a moment alone. He was talking about finding them an apartment in town. They seem content here for now, I replied. We've settled into a workable routine. Over dinner that evening, with all four of us gathered around the small kitchen table, the conversation turned to the living arrangements that had brought Walter and Vivian to my cottage. To my surprise, Lily was the one who broached the subject directly. I want to apologize for how this was handled, she said, looking from me to her in-laws. Marcus made the decision without proper consultation, and I didn't stand up for you, Mom, the way I should have. It's complicated, Vivian offered. We were desperate, and Marcus was trying to help in his way. By sending you to live in the woods, instead of offering his own home. Lily's tone held an edge I rarely heard from her. There's nothing complicated about that. It was wrong. Walter cleared his throat. To be fair, we raised him with certain values. Appearance above substance, status above family. We're hardly in a position to criticize the result. This frank acknowledgement seemed to surprise Lily as much as it did me. The conversation that followed was perhaps the most honest exchange these two families had ever shared. Walter and Vivian spoke openly about their financial mistakes, their regrets about the values they had instilled in Marcus, and their gradual awakening during their time at the cottage. Lily, in turn, revealed aspects of her marriage I hadn't known. Marcus and I have been struggling for some time, she admitted. His focus on appearances and status clashes with what I actually value. That's why I maintain the apartment in Chicago. It gives me space to be myself. Why stay in the marriage? I asked gently, finally asking the question I had wondered for years. Lily looked down at her hands. Commitment means something to me, and there was good between us once. But lately, she trailed off, then squared her shoulders. Actually, I've made a decision. I'm taking a sabbatical from my position to work on an environmental research project in Costa Rica. 6 months minimum. Does Marcus know? Vivian asked. I told him last week, Lily replied. He thinks it's a phase I'm going through. He doesn't understand that it's actually who I am, who I've always been. As the evening progressed, a remarkable proposal emerged. Walter and Vivian, who had initially been forced upon me as unwanted guests, tentatively suggested a more intentional arrangement. We've been talking, Walter began, glancing at Vivian for confirmation. This time here has been transformative for us. We've learned skills we never had and discovered a kind of peace we'd forgotten was possible. What Walter is trying to say, Vivian continued, is that we're wondering if we might stay on, not as imposed guests, but as contributing members of this little homestead. We could help with the heavier work-share expenses from our modest remaining funds, perhaps even expand the garden. I was momentarily speechless. This was the last outcome I had anticipated when preparing my educational surprise for these city dwellers. I had expected them to flee back to civilization at the first opportunity, not to embrace the very lifestyle they had once dismissed. You actually want to stay by choice? I asked, wanting to be certain I understood. Walter nodded. We've been happier here despite the challenges than we've been in years. There's an honesty to this life that we've been missing. No pretense, no keeping up appearances. Just the satisfaction of necessary work and quiet evenings. Besides, Vivian added with surprising pragmatism, our financial reality doesn't offer many alternatives. We can contribute here in ways that matter, rather than being a burden elsewhere. Lily looked as astonished as I felt. You're serious? You want to live in a cottage with a composting toilet instead of trying to rebuild your old lifestyle? The old lifestyle was a mirage, Walter replied. It took losing everything to see that clearly. As this extraordinary conversation continued, potential practical arrangements were discussed. The small second bedroom could be modified to give them more privacy. Walter had already identified several projects around the property that could improve comfort without sacrificing sustainability. Vivian had ideas for expanding the herb garden into a potential small business selling at the local farmers market. Lily, after recovering from her initial shock, was supportive. Mom's always said this place had too much work for one person, she noted, and I'd worry less knowing she had company, especially when I'm in Costa Rica. As the evening wound down, I found myself considering this unexpected proposition. These people who had once looked down on my chosen lifestyle now wanted to share it. The surprise I had prepared to educate them had apparently succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. I asked for time to think about the arrangement, which they readily agreed to. That night, after Lily had departed and Walter and Vivian had retired to their room, I sat on the porch, contemplating this strange turn of events. The night sounds of the forest, owls calling, the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth, the gentle gurgle of the creek, provided a soothing backdrop to my thoughts. I had intended to teach Walter and Vivian a lesson about respecting others' choices and understanding the realities of a lifestyle they had dismissed. Instead, they had embraced those lessons so thoroughly that they wanted to adopt the lifestyle themselves. There was a certain poetic justice in this outcome, yet also genuine human growth that deserved acknowledgement. The next morning, I rose as usual with the dawn. To my surprise, Walter was already on the porch with coffee prepared. "Couldn't sleep," he explained. "Too much thinking about possibilities." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the mist rise from the creek before I finally spoke. "If we're going to try this, there would need to be clear understandings. This is my home, built according to my values and preferences. I'm open to improvements, but not fundamental changes to the sustainable systems I've established." Walter nodded seriously. "Absolutely. We've come to appreciate those systems, not despite their challenges, but because of what they represent: thoughtful, intentional living." "And this arrangement would need to be a true partnership," I continued. "Shared work, shared expenses, according to ability, shared decision-making about common spaces while respecting each other's privacy." "That's exactly what we want," he assured me. "Not charity, but contribution. A chance to rebuild something meaningful from the wreckage of our former life." Later that day, when Vivian joined the conversation, she added her own perspective. "I was thinking about what you said when we first arrived, about adjusting to nature's rhythms rather than fighting them. That applies to life stages too, doesn't it? Instead of fighting against our current reality, we can adapt and find new purpose." Her insight surprised and impressed me. Perhaps there was more depth to Vivian than I had previously recognized. 2 days later, Marcus arrived in response to Lily's report about the unexpected developments. He looked distinctly uncomfortable as Walter showed him the expanded vegetable garden, and Vivian explained her plans for medicinal herbs. "You can't be serious about staying here," he finally blurted out during an awkward lunch on the porch. "This is primitive. What about your standard of living?" Walter regarded his son thoughtfully. "Our standard of living nearly destroyed us, Marcus. The constant pressure to maintain appearances, to belong to the right clubs, to have the right address. It was exhausting and ultimately hollow." "But your whole life has been built around those things," Marcus protested. "Your business, your social connections." "And where did it get us?" Vivian asked gently. "Bankrupt with a son who wouldn't even take us in when we needed help." Marcus flinched at this direct statement of an uncomfortable truth. "The timing with the renovations was just bad," he began, but Walter interrupted. "Marcus, we're not blaming you. In fact, sending us here may be the best thing you could have done for us, though that wasn't your intention. We've discovered a different way of valuing our time and contributions." "So you're just giving up becoming forest people?" Marcus couldn't keep the dismay from his voice. "Not giving up," Walter corrected. "Starting over on a more solid foundation, building something real instead of an illusion of success." Marcus left soon after, clearly unsettled by this dramatic shift in his parents' perspective. His parting words to me held a mix of confusion and accusation. "I don't know what you did to them, but they're not the same people." "That's their choice, not my doing," I replied simply. Sometimes circumstances force us to reconsider what truly matters. In the month that followed, what had begun as an unwelcome imposition transformed into a promising partnership. Walter revealed unexpected handyman skills, tackling projects around the property that had been beyond my capabilities alone. Vivian's organizational talents proved valuable in managing our shared household and planning the expanded garden. Most surprisingly, their presence enriched rather than disrupted my peaceful existence. Evening conversations on the porch became a pleasant ritual, sharing experiences and perspectives across our very different life paths. Walter's dry humor emerged once freed from the pressure of maintaining a successful businessman persona. Vivian's genuine interest in learning sustainable skills revealed a curious mind long suppressed by social expectations. When Lily departed for her research project in Costa Rica, she did so with visible relief, knowing I wasn't alone in my woodland home. Her relationship with Marcus remained uncertain, but she was finally pursuing work that aligned with her deepest values. The arrangement we established was formalized with Walter and Vivian contributing their remaining savings to winterizing the cottage and building a small addition that would give all of us more privacy. The local community gradually accepted them as permanent residents rather than displaced city dwellers, particularly after Vivian's herbal remedies began gaining a following at the farmers' market. 1 year after their unexpected arrival, we sat together on the expanded porch Walter had built, watching fireflies rise from the meadow as dusk settled over the forest. The cottage had evolved much as its inhabitants had, still simple and sustainable, but with thoughtful improvements that enhanced our shared life. "I was thinking about that phone call," Walter mused, sipping the blackberry wine that had become our evening tradition. "When Marcus announced we were moving in with you." "A rather presumptuous moment," I agreed with a smile. "I was terrified," Vivian admitted. "I thought it would be the final humiliation in our downfall. Instead, it became the beginning of something authentic." Walter raised his glass in a toast. "To unexpected blessings, and to the teacher who had the wisdom to let us learn through experience, rather than telling us what we wouldn't have heard." I clinked my glass against theirs, acknowledging the truth in his words. My surprise had been conceived in frustration and a desire for justice, but it had evolved into something far more valuable, a genuine connection based on mutual respect and shared purpose. The cottage in the woods, once my solitary sanctuary, had become something I hadn't known I needed. A community small but meaningful, built on authentic connection rather than obligation. When my son-in-law had demanded I house his parents, he couldn't have imagined that his entitled ultimatum would result in this harmonious arrangement, or that his parents would choose simplicity over returning to their previous lifestyle. As autumn painted the surrounding forest in brilliant reds and golds, we worked together, preparing for the coming winter, splitting and stacking wood-preserving garden harvests, making minor repairs to ensure the cottage would remain snug through the cold months ahead. Each task was approached with shared purpose, our different strengths complementing one another in ways none of us could have anticipated. Lily returned from Costa Rica for a brief visit before the first snow, bringing exotic coffee and stories of her research. She seemed lighter, more herself than she had been in years, her passion for environmental work reignited. Her relationship with Marcus remained complicated. They were technically still married, but living increasingly separate lives. "He doesn't understand why I can't just be happy with the life he's created," she explained one evening as we all sat by the wood stove. "The beautiful house, the social connections, the status. Those things matter to him in ways they never have to me." "We taught him those values," Walter acknowledged with regret. "Success measured by possessions and appearances." "People can change," Vivian offered, gesturing around at our rustic setting. "Look at us," Lily smiled. "That's what gives me hope. Seeing you both here happier, with less than you ever were with more. It's powerful." The winter passed with unexpected pleasures. Snowshoeing through silent woods, reading aloud by lamplight during power outages, teaching Walter and Vivian to play the old card games David and I had enjoyed. The isolation that might have felt lonely when I was alone became a peaceful retreat shared with compatible spirits. Spring brought Marcus back to the cottage, his purpose initially unclear, until he reluctantly revealed that his own business was facing difficulties. "The market has shifted," he explained, his usual confidence noticeably dimmed. "Several major developments have stalled. Investors are getting nervous." Walter listened with genuine empathy, offering thoughtful advice without judgment. Their relationship had evolved too, less defined by expectations and disappointment, more by honest communication. Marcus still couldn't understand his parents' choice to remain at the cottage, but he had stopped trying to rescue them from it. As we moved into our second year of shared living, the arrangement that had begun as my surprise response to an unwanted imposition had become something none of us would willingly give up. Walter and Vivian had found purpose and peace after the collapse of their former life. I had found companionship without sacrificing independence. The cottage had become not just my sanctuary, but our shared home, proof that sometimes life's most valuable lessons come through experiences we would never have chosen ourselves. Recently, as we celebrated the second anniversary of their arrival, Walter raised his glass in a toast that perfectly captured our journey. To unexpected beginnings, authentic living, and the surprise that changed everything. Not the one Roberta prepared for us, but the discovery that what truly matters has nothing to do with status or possessions, and everything to do with purpose, connection, and genuine belonging. Have you ever had an unwanted situation turn into an unexpected blessing? Or found yourself setting boundaries with family in creative ways? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this tale of forest living and finding authentic connections resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life experiences. Share with someone who might be struggling with entitled family members or considering a simpler lifestyle. Thank you for joining me on this journey from frustration to friendship in the forest. Sometimes the most beautiful surprises are the ones we never planned.